Welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co-host, David.
Hey, everyone.
And so this week, Dave is going to mock me for my correct opinions about supports because, I've apparently become a clown. Am I a joke to you, Dave? Do I make you
No,
laugh?
no, you're just an angry old man that yells at clouds if our last 2 weeks are anything to talk about. But I am interested to hear your view on supports. And yeah, maybe it's worth mocking, maybe not. We'll find out here in only time will tell.
Yeah, fair enough. But just to start out, I'm going to be fairly bullish on supports. I think that if you are starting out or if you have an account, there are going to be very few cases where a support character in a Hoyoverse game is going to be a bad pool. That would be my follow-up rule to the Archon. They don't make bad Archons. Supports are generally useful and generally good. And I have a mathematical theorem as to why that is the case, but before we get into my theorem, Dave, what are your thoughts on supports?
Well, my initial thoughts are if you come up with 8 more rules, we'll have Steve's 10 commandments of gotcha gaming, and maybe we make that an episode there in the future. But so I do want to kind of back up a little bit and kind of define what is a support character to you. Who are you? What kind of characters are you including in that? Is it purely they heal the party, or is it shielding? Like what exactly is a support character to you?
For the purposes of this discussion, a support would not be someone who heals or shields. That is a sustain. That is that is a unit or champion or character, depending on whatever game it is that you're playing and naming scheme that they use. Those characters sustain the party, they keep them alive. Supports are characters that make the party do the thing better. So in MMO terms, these are buffers, these are debuffers, ones that change stats, increase damage, decrease opponents' defenses, what have you. For Genshin, a perhaps classic example would be Bennett. I think Bennett's actually more of a 50-50 between sustain and support, but a better one would probably be Nilu, where what she does is she enables I think it's Hyper Bloom. I always get that one wrong, but the Hyper Bloom team with the greater damage from the bloom action by having a very limited team, but she herself isn't really the one that's doing the DPS. You want to be having a potentially different character with higher elemental mastery spawning the seeds, because those are the ones that actually do the damage. Honkai Star Rail is a little bit easier to categorize supports. Those are characters like Robin, Tingyun, Sparkle, etc., etc.
So if I'm understanding this right, so you're not saying that they can't heal. That's not necessarily their primary function. It's kind of the all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares situation, right? So
correct. I would say that the main purpose of the character when they're on your team is to basically enable other characters on the team, not do damage, not keep the party alive. They serve as an enable. Again, with Genshin, it's a little bit more difficult. I think that a lot of the characters in Genshin don't fall great into that specific niche. Characters like Sucrose, Kazuha, I think, would be other good examples of it, since they are, animo, they drive reactions, they provide secondary buffs to the party, things like that. But every character's kind of a sub DPS in Genshin. It's a little bit weird. I think Honkai Star Rail does a better job of sort of categorizing characters by giving them specific roles, specific classes that they fall in. So Genshin, this model doesn't work 100%. I will say that I do think every Archon is functionally a support. I don't believe we have a main DPS Archon at this time, at least at E0, or Constellation 0. It's not Edelon. So Constellation 0, I don't think any Archon is a full DPS. I think they would fall under the support category.
Okay. So then your theorem then is you're stating that for a new account, that pulling for a support character first isn't a bad pull as opposed to getting a DPS?
Correct. And basically the sum of my argument would be that when you look at the value of characters, DPS scale linearly. That a DPS, if you have 2 DPS on a team, you get whatever the value of the damage that one DPS does plus the value of the damage another DPS does. So you get linear scaling. Whereas with support characters, you get multiplicative. Man, I butchered whatever that word is. It grows by multiples. So if you have a DPS that does, and I'm going to throw out a bunch of numbers, but none of them matter, just kind of, this is meant theory-wise.
Right.
So if you have a DPS that does, let's say, 2 DPS, the DPS value is 2. And you have another DPS and it does 2. You get 4 total DPS. There's some real-world reasons why you don't usually get 2 plus 2 in that scenario. Typically, DPSs tend to fight over time on board or time, out on the field. In Genshin's case, SP, energy generation, so on and so forth. So usually you don't get that nice 2 plus 2. It's usually, diminishing values over time, but we're ignoring that. Just straight value 2 plus 2. And then if you add let's say, a support character on there instead of a third DPS character, and that character as a support multiplies the total value of those DPS characters by 2. So you have 2 plus 2 times 2. And you would end up with, we're going to ignore PIMDOS for our purposes. We're going to group together the DPS. 2 plus 2 is 4. You then multiply that by the supports.
The 2 plus 2 would be in parentheses,
Yes.
and then the times 2.
Yeah, we're ignoring
our order of operations.
We're ignoring PIMDOS. I know that I think BIMDOS or something, like they use brackets or somewhere else in Australia or you. That's not important, right? Again, I'm throwing a lot of numbers. The idea, though, is that each support that you add multiplies that number. So if you were to replace that 2 DPS character with another support, you would get, instead of 8, you'd actually technically still get 8 because I'm bad. I didn't set up this math problem very cool.
Well,
But,
let me,
they scale much better.
Let me kind of make a counter argument
Sure.
here because, and I'm going to throw out some numbers as well and kind of going with your additive versus multiplicative. I think that's maybe how you say it.
It's not exponential. I know
too.
it's not exponential growth.
I'm going to stumble over that word too. But to go along with that theory, right? So you're making the case that a support character is going to multiply your force power, let's call it, right? Whatever imaginary term for the sake of the conversation, I'll just call it your force. So you have a DPS, and you're just saying any standard DPS, right, that you have, and then the support would multiply that force of the DPS unit, as opposed to pulling for a DPS and not maybe having the support. And what I would say, and I'm going to make an analogy here, so give me a little bit of leash, follow me here, folks, is in the early game, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because in the early game, you're looking at a DPS force, let's say, of 1, and 1 times 2 is 2. Whereas if you were to have 2 DPS and 1 DPS is worth 1 and the other DPS, let's say it's worth 1 or 2, you're already at a higher value than that multiplicative. Gotta say it slow, otherwise I'm gonna stumble it. But now this is early game. Now if you look at like end game content, right, then obviously the force power of that DPS isn't gonna be the base 1 anymore because you've leveled up the DPS. It has better gear. It has the skill talents leveled up as well. So again, you're not multiplying a base number of 1 anymore. You're multiplying a base number maybe of 4. So instead of taking 4 plus 2 being 6, now with that support, to your point, that's 4 times 2 is 8, right? And we are X percentage stronger than if we just had the 2 DPS. And this is kind of a theory that holds true in another game that I play called Teamfight Tactics. We've referenced it a little bit in the past. But when we talk about having a strong board, and I know I may be losing a couple folks who aren't familiar with Teamfight Tactics, but it's an auto chess battler. But essentially, when we're talking about having a strong board in the early game, you want raw flat numbers, because things that are multiplicative, when you're multiplying it by those low base numbers, you're not going to get as much. But as you shift towards the end game in a match of TFT, you're not you're multiplying those numbers by higher base numbers because characters are leveled up or characters are stronger rarity units, right? And so that's kind of where I'm getting this concept and transferring it over to the logic here. Now, I understand it's not a perfect one-for-one analogy. There's obviously some nuance because these are two different types of games, but the logic is kind of what I'm trying to use. So while I agree with your statement ultimately, for the long term, for the playing the game for a long period of time, pulling for a support first may make the initial gameplay a bit tougher than it needs to be because you're force multiplying 1 by 2 instead of adding 2 to get 3. Does that make sense?
It does. I again, this is going to be a little bit of a push back and forth here, but
Sure. That's where the fun is.
yeah, I guess my argument would be, again, Hoyoverse games are not typically one where you are running into a lot of serious walls. And I can say this as somebody who had to push through the Hoyoverse Pinaconi story with a very underlevel team, and basically I just kept the world level low until I was able to, complete the story for the purposes of putting it up behind us while we're talking. And then, after the fact, I could go in and actually do the work of and take the time to level characters and bring them up. So with even a janky team, I was able to do pretty okay. Whereas I think the long-term pool value that you get from a support character is just very valuable. With all of that also being said, we also don't get to choose when we pull characters.
It's true.
When you start whatever the banner is or banners that are available, those are the ones that you're going to get. The slight exception would be if you were doing re-rolling, which at this point that's kind of moot for the Hoyoverse games that are on the market. Or if you're getting after X number of pools, you get your choose your character option, like with Honkai Star Rail and so forth, which for most people, the suggestion is if you don't have Bronya, get Bronya. The follow-up to that would be if you have Bronya, Himiko would be a good backup for Pure Fiction, but that's kind of a separate subject we don't need to get into. So,
we're already getting deep enough with the numbers.
We're already getting deep enough.
We don't need to go that deep in a second segment.
Yeah, my point mainly is that because the advantages sustains have that over DPSs is that they are much more.
You mean sports?
Yes, supports. I said I was going to do it back in the sustain video. I'm going to do it all the time here. I'm going to get those two flip-flopped. So I do apologize. So the main advantage supports have over DPSs is that they don't scale off of their own numbers. That they scale off of whatever DPS their enhancing numbers are. They get to sit in time and go, okay, it doesn't matter if a new great DPS comes out. They get to just buff whoever that is regardless. And as long as the buffs that they are providing are compatible with that character, they just get better because they don't have to worry about their numbers. They just are, hey, I give a 300% buff. Again, number from a hat, doesn't matter if that's real or not. If you give a 300% buff, you're going to give a 300% buff to a character that does 100 damage or to a character that does 10,000 damage. It's a 300% buff regardless. So because of that ability to just continue to sit there and kind of get locked in time, their value does not decrease in nearly the same way that DPSs have that issue, and to a lesser degree sustains, because damage does go up a little bit, but it's less of a...
So two things. Because I think, like I said, I'm gonna say this because I know we're gonna go get lost in the sauce here and discuss and debate this back and forth. I agree with you on the long term, right? As far as if you're playing something long term, investing in a support early, it is not a bad move because of what they can ultimately apply in a multiplicative sense. However, there were two things that you said that were interesting to me that I'd kind of want your thoughts on. The first thing you said was when you were running through the Penaconi on the second account, for our backdrop here, you said you kept the world level low.
Yes.
And I wonder, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on, is that, I mean, there's probably a little bit of column A of you wanted to get the video available so that way you can have it be as the backdrop. I'm sure that plays into it a little bit. But would there be a bit of it that plays into it that because the world level isn't as high, because the support, while it is supporting the DPS, if you had better or more DPS, you could clear the harder content?
So, um, the problem really wasn't DPS for that team because by the end of the recording of it, I had the full rat team. I had Ratio, Venturine, Topaz, and Robin. So I had a meta team. The issue that I kept running into was the fact that I didn't have the time. Because, full disclosure, even though we were watching these videos, like you're seeing this backdrop now in October, I finished recording all of this back in March because I didn't know how long the footage was. I didn't know how far ahead I had to go, so I just kind of sprinted through it. I did not stop and take a lot of time to level characters, do dailies in order to kind of do that natural growth. I sprinted through it. So a lot of my characters, while we're playing through this, and that's why you'll see me lose to bosses that in my own personal account, I demolished because I was taking it at a much more reasonable pace. Also, content. Pinnacle wasn't out when I first started, obviously. So I had a lot more time to build up before going into Pinnacle. But regardless, the characters on that team are running with low talent levels because I just didn't have the time when I was doing the recording. I did it all in like 2 weeks, I think.
Mhm.
I burned through it. So I didn't have the time to get all the talents on the team leveled. Their relics are awful. Absolutely awful. They're garbage relics on those characters. It was just a bad team in general. like the team itself was fine, but like the leveling of them and so on and so forth was bad. I wasn't even able to complete the ability to move up in world level at certain points. Like I would attempt and then fail because the talents and relics and everything else that my team had were just not up to snuff. So I was scraping by at the world level I could scrape by at,
Okay.
and then kind of went, okay, fine. But the team itself, from a like strategic team
From a
building point of
synergy
view, from a
standpoint,
synergy point
made
of view,
sense. It was just those other things.
yeah, it
Okay.
was the meta team at the time.
Okay, that's fair, and that's a little peek behind the curtain
Yeah.
for those that are intrigued about, what you're watching on the screen, or if you're playing the game, you're like, man, he's making this content look difficult. Like, well, that's kind of part of why. Now, the other thing you said, and I think you're making my argument for me a little bit when you said this, but maybe you can expand on it. But you mentioned that the support character is going to buff 300% regardless of what it is. But the DPS unit, their numbers change, right?
Mhm.
The support is the support, and how much they support will just depend on the DPS. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying with if that's the case, wouldn't you want to get a solid DPS for that multiplicative factor if the support is just going to be a flat support, right?
Yeah. So I get where that argument would come in. I guess mine would be if you're going to be pulling a 3. Again, we're tossing numbers around, so this is all going to kind of come down to it depends
It's
on
the
how you
thought
value those
experiment.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be pulling and you're getting a 3 instead of a 1 DPS, that doesn't really. If you're getting a support that would give you 300%, you've come out net neutral, but the support is going to have more legs. They're going to be able to last longer. They're going to enable more teams, so on and so forth.
Presumably.
Presumably, one would hope. Whereas, you can scrape by with a DPS that might not be up to snuff if you have a support that can really hypercharge them. As someone who runs with Jingliu, Lightning Lord guy, he's gotten a lot of little buffs over time. He was not an amazing character when he first came out. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't amazing. But the continued support that he has been getting is what has been able to keep him relevant. Whereas Sealy does not have that advantage. She's had some buffs, but she's not been getting the low and slow sort of buffs that other characters have gotten. I would argue Jing Liu, the ice lady.
Yep.
That's been one of the problems that she's had, is that she hasn't been getting supports that have been able to help keep her relevant. Blade has been having issues where he hasn't gotten supports that have helped keep him relevant. And I feel like, supports are kind of, at this point, the most valuable slot that you could get. To kind of bring it back to real life experience, recently you had to re-pull for Ruan Mei, if I remember correctly. And
Yeah, I pulled for her on her rerun. Yes.
yeah, and how do you feel about being able to get Robin, who's also enables a lot of teams? Would she have been a good pull versus, obviously Jade would have been, was a good pick by you, but, are there any other characters that you kind of would have gone, maybe I should have gotten Sparkle or Robin, or I don't know what other characters you might potentially. You do have Sparkle. I didn't remember if you
yeah,
did or not.
Yeah, so I mean, well, with taking that angle, right, you're listing off a lot of those supports, and you talk about, well, are there characters you wish you would have pulled for, even though, yeah, I did pull for Ruan Mei, and then I missed out on Robin, but those are both supports, right? And again, I think that kind of goes back to you may be making my point a little bit, because you can make the case that you want like both of those. You want Robin or you want Ruan Mei. They both, but I guess the counterpoint would be
But you do want both of them.
well, slightly. They enable different teams. Yeah. But let me apply the logic to maybe, I guess, apply it to any launch of a new gacha game, right? So any new gacha game that comes out, and everybody's like, oh, what's the tier list? What's the tier list? What's the tier list? Who should I re-roll for? I think, and I don't have any numbers or anything to back it up. I just kind of have my lived experience and what I recall seeing. And you can probably push back on this a little bit because I don't have the numbers. But most of those guides, while they will, of course, give you who the SS characters are to re-roll for, I feel a majority of those are DPS characters, because they are going to set you up and allow you to push that early content and maximize whatever rewards or whatever things you get for clearing early chapters. And this goes back to my original point, which was, again, in the long term, over months, year plus of playing the game, I agree with you. I think supports have great value. But for that initial push, if there's any rewards for finishing things within a certain period of time, like the 30-day like honeymoon beginner stuff, I don't think a support is the answer for like those types of situations. I think that the DPS is the way to go. And again, I think with a lot of tier lists we get on gacha game launches, the DPS is there's usually a DPS character or two that guides and the number crunchers are looking at, saying this is who you want to roll for and this is who you want to do. Very rarely is it a tank. There are some supports and healers, though. There are maybe healers. But what are your thoughts on that? And maybe is your experience or memory a little bit different on what you recall on some of these launch tier list guides?
So I somewhat agree with you. I do think there are outliers. If I remember correctly, again, I'm going to have to point to Honkai Star Rail. Bronya was the character to re-roll for on that one, because that was the one you actually had control over potentially getting. Like, that was the standard banner high-end character, was get Bronya. She's going to enable stuff because we're action advance and so on and so forth. For other gachas, I will agree, it tends to be more DPS. My counter argument to that would be, in a lot of cases, DPS are easier to see the value in because they give you big shiny. They stand out, easier to tell, okay, this DPS does X amount of damage, and they're going to really work for you. They are a standalone, complete unit in and of themselves. Whereas support characters are the broccoli, the meat and potatoes, whatever you want to use for they're the unsexy character class. They don't tend to make themselves as shiny as other, main DPS, or in some cases healers and so forth, depending on the game. They're harder to quantify because they do rely so much on the other units in their team. So I would say, if you're re-rolling, I understand why guides are going to say, hey, this is the character that, if you put all their numbers in a spreadsheet, does the most damage. because yeah, they're in a spreadsheet, they're doing the most damage. I think overall you're going to get more value long term from those supports, and I think that on that point we agree that it's the long term value there is where you're going to get it. I just don't think that short term burst that you're going to get from the DPS is going to amount to as much value as you would potentially get over time from a support character. Because, let's say you are able to complete, MOC or whatever within the first 2 weeks. You're able to do it with the DPS character that you get. That's what, like 3 pulls, maybe? In the full lifespan of when you're going to be playing that game? Like, okay, you might miss out on a few pulls early on, but you're saving them later when you can pull for other stuff. The other caveat that I should have put up in front of all of this is pull for who you want. If there's a DPS character that you love, pull for that character. Obviously, I'm not telling you that have to pull for supports. I'm just saying that value-wise, I think supports hold up a lot better over time, and that even if you're first starting out, don't necessarily be distracted by big numbers. There's a lot of value in having a workhorse unit that you can put into all of your teams that will just make other characters better. Is, I guess, sort of, if you were to boil my point down, sort of what I'm trying to get.
And that's, like I said, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, that's a good caveat. Yeah, again, ultimately pull for who you would like to pull for. Yeah, I just for that short quick return on investment. Yeah, the getting that DPS is going to be, I think, something that really pushes the account early. Yes, but over time, long term.
Yeah, and there is also the fun factor.
Yeah,
to bring up.
Yeah, true. That's also the fun factor. Now, I will say, for me, kind of to ultimately go back to your main point, and I think the main thing you said was supports equals infinite value.
A bit hyperbolic, but yeah.
It was hyperbolic, and so to take that hyperbolic statement and absolutely dunk on it, if you don't have any DPS, 0 times infinity is still 0.
I mean, fine, but
roasted.
Guess what? Support characters still do a modicum amount of DPS, so 0.1 times infinity is still infinity.
That true. Have fun taking an hour to clear MOC with your support.
So, obviously you do need something, but grumble.
Boom, roasted. Got him, coach. All right.
Well, but I guess to kind of
because I ultimately agree with what you're saying on a long-term building the account, a long-term investment. Support is a good call. Again, just to take it at its most rudimentary and basic thing of what you said, yeah, that's the easy answer, but it's more fun to dive actually deep into the nitty-gritty, deep into numbers and theory craft, kind of what direction that goes, and hopefully others have some thoughts or input on that. We'd love to hear from you guys in that regards. But what are maybe some of your closing thoughts, Steve, or any other points that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I guess some of the other broad topics I guess I would want to discuss is that this is part of the reason why Archons are so valuable, is that what they do is they serve as supports that open up play styles. They allow for teams to do fun, interesting things. Ruan Mei, or is Ruan Mei? Whatever her name is in the game. Shogun. Raiden Shogun. There we go.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Sorry, she's an XP of Ruan Mei. Anyways, doesn't matter. So Shogun, her ability to just supercharge characters' ultimates, opens up a lot of fun different play styles. Nahida opens up a lot of fun play styles. Zhongli doesn't open up any fun play styles, but makes you invulnerable.
It seems pretty fun to me.
Well, being able to just face tank things is pretty fun, but
I don't have to learn the mechanics of the game. Yeah,
unless they throw wolves at you, and then it's game over. But
yeah, I didn't do much exploring in Inazuma for a decent bit anyway.
But I think that's part of the reason why Archons are so valuable, is because of their support role, the fact that they open up these play styles. And looking over at Honkai Star Rail, Robin really opens up the follow attack play style. Ruan Mei really opens up the break, and Harmony MC both open up the break play style. Sparkle opens up the I want to spend all my SP play style, and as we move forward, I'm going to be looking at what supports come out to kind of see what direction the wind is blowing as far as Hoyoverse and what they're looking to release. Because I think that in many ways, they signpost the direction that they are taking the game to a certain degree off of what supports they're dropping and what they're buffing, what they're going to be able to do. And that sort of drives their direction as far as game design goes.
So yeah, I think my next Honkai Star Rail, what I'm looking for is an Acheron rerun because I want to get her into my dot team. But as far as seeing what new characters they have on the horizon, I'm kind of interested to see what way they go. Now I do want to kind of excuse me, before we move to events, and I know obviously we have a new character in Star Rail we want to talk about. I do want to kind of hijack a little bit, and Steve, if you let me go on a little bit of a mini rant, I won't. I don't want to take more than maybe 10 minutes on this, but
it doesn't have to be a mini rant. We could turn it into a full blown rant, but I'm willing to play along.
Depending on what you think and what your thoughts are on it. Yeah, it might be a full blown rant, but I do want to do a little bit of a mini rant real quick. So this week I've been having I had the opportunity to really sit down and play Honkai Star Rail and actually drill into the story a bit and the recent story chapters that we've had with the war games that were going on and the Boyson or the Boysian the wolf group rebellion and escape from prison, everything like that. And while the story itself I'm very intrigued by and interested in and kind of liking some of the different plot points and such. I will say what was very frustrating to me was for every portion of the campaign, almost every portion of the campaign, or every section of it, I guess I should say, they were forcing a unit into your party to kind of preview that character's playstyle, right? Whether it be Yun Li, I was gonna say Fei Zhao, and I forget the fox guy's name. But anyway,
yeah.
So they're forcing those characters into your party, and while that's cool in that you have the opportunity to see those characters in action, do that. That's kind of what their demo is for, right? That's what the character spotlight or showcase is for. And while maybe, let us run around the overworld with them, right, to see all the run animations and things and just kind of for the immersion, as it were, because they're in the chapter, they're clearly playing a main part in the story if they're in your party and being forced to play as them. When it comes to your actual party formation for fights, just let us have the 4 characters that we want to use. Because quite literally, I think for each one of those situations, I do not have characters that synergize with these particular characters, and therefore either my team minus somebody is incomplete in terms of its synergy. So like if I'm playing Kafka, Black Swan, Ho-Oh, and Runmei, and I take any one of those 4 out, well, I'm missing a critical point. I'm either missing my healer, I'm missing Runmei for supports and break damage and such, and the speed boosts that she gives. I'm missing Black Swan for dots to throw on the enemies, or I'm missing or I'm missing Kafka who triggers explosions on dots that are on the enemies, right? So if I take Black Swan out, Kafka doesn't have much to explode, and if I take Kafka out, there's nobody there to explode Black Swan dots, right? So what I like to, and Genshin doesn't have this problem because Genshin, when they throw in a character to let you play them and run around with them in a story mission, they're that 5th option, right? It doesn't mess with your party of 4. It just gives you that 5th option. And I understand Genshin has more flexibility to do that because Star Rail, we got these 4 spaces where these 4 character models are going to stand. We don't have a space in this screen for a 5th character model. So I get why you can't do something like that. Just add a 5th one. I understand that to an extent, but don't force us to play with a character just because they're pivotal to the story. There's even a brief section, because I know this is possible, right? I know it's possible to do what I'm wanting them to do here, because there's a brief section where you get the little ice boy for a split second, and you go into a combat, and he does not have to be in your party. You can create whatever party you want, and so I went back to my default party that I campaign with, and he didn't have to be in it, even though he was in the overworld running around. Or they had to be the imaginary damage March 7th, right? The sword version of March 7th. They had us be her in a story. And it would be one thing, right, if I was able to, even with my half-ass team that isn't fully built, is definitely not itemized, the talent points definitely aren't there. It'd be one thing if I could clear the content with that. But then if you can't clear the content, and then they're like, oh, would you like to try again, or would you like to buff it down to casual mode? And I'm like, casual mode, please, because that's what this team is, casual. They are on my bench watching everybody else play, right? And then you go to switch to casual, and the game's like, are you sure you want to do that? This could ruin your combat experience. And I'm sitting here going, no, what ruined my combat experience is you forcing me to play with a character that I have 0 synergy characters built with. So that's my mini rant.
Okay.
It took 6-7 minutes. So, Steve, thoughts? What's your response to that?
So,
Go.
devil's advocate response would be that they're not going far enough. You heard me. Hoyo is not going far enough. If they're going to be putting in these sort of characters, they should be forcing like 3 or 4 characters onto you in order to make sure that they have that synergy, similar to what they do in events, where they give you a half a team or a 3/4 of a team and then go, okay, use these characters. In basically every scenario if I remember from the story mode, basically in every scenario save like 1 or 2, there were 3 characters there that they could have just said, fine, you have to play as these 3 characters in this pre-set up team. And just done it that way. This way, all you have to do is put in sustain character or like 1 character, and you still have a semi-functional team. Just balance that. I don't have quite the level of frustration that you had with it. I will admit that the Fushuan, whatever, I actually have her name right up here. Yeah, Fei Zhuao. The final fight really threw me for a loop. I had to try it multiple times because they just weren't the forced characters for that were leaving me going like I'm trying to throw something together here and it's just not working.
I failed it and then barely got through it still on casual mode because again, those characters that synergize with her are not built.
Yeah.
And I think, and even if I had characters that were built, it's still the principle of the matter. Now, you bring up an interesting thing to go completely the opposite direction in that, yeah, give me a full team that synergizes with this character. Yeah, that's acceptable as well. I'll allow it.
Yeah. Like, I feel like that if they want to force you to use a character, they need to give you the tools to make sure that you can, that unlike Genshin, and again, I agree, I understand that even if they did have the ability to add 5 characters on the field, having a 5th character breaks combat because of the way SP works, and, skill points and all that. That trying to fit in that many characters is just going to take the combat and break it over its knee. It doesn't function that well that way. The other option would be to do what they do with other instances where they want to have a character present, but they're not willing to just force them on you, is turn them into an R button, where you get to summon a train or Zhongli, Spear Boy shoots a giant beam at
Imbiber Don Hung.
Dong Hung, yeah.
The Lightning Lord for his combat. Yeah,
like we
fair.
have those as well. So, those, I think either of those are better solutions. I don't think that the R option is necessarily the one to go with in most cases, because that's something that's typically reserved for big, bombastic, end of patch fights. So if you're just looking to do it like, hey, this is a run around, get to try out the character type moment, maybe a more of a trial version team where they go, okay, fine, we will give you whoever this 5-star is or whoever this character is, and then at least we'll give you the option to take in these characters. If you want to use your own, you can. The only character that's required should be the story character, but they at least also give you other characters that can help, that are built and able to support that character. Would be sort of the road that I would take on it. But yeah, anyway, I don't necessarily disagree with you.
All right. Well, I had to get that off my chest, so I'm glad to see there's some agreement there, and that's a good alternative way of looking at it as far as finding the solution. So, but I know we got a lot of other stuff to get to because we do, like I said, have Lingsha, new character in Star Rail to discuss. We have a couple of new events going on, and then we also have a bunch of news outside of the Hoyoverse world that I want to talk about as well. But let's jump first into our events going on. So, Steve, what do we got in events?
So, for Honkai Star Rail, we have the Festive Revelry. It is a puzzle event. Dave, you'll be super excited to hear this because there are no timers on these puzzles.
Let's go.
You can go in, you can complete all of them, you can complete hard mode on all of them, and there's no wait. You could have done it day one. By this point, Monday they all would have been unlocked anyways, but I was super happy to see that last week when I played through it all and knocked them all out, that there was no wait. I was able to blast through them all, get them completed, get my early rewards or my limited time rewards, and move on. So that was really it for Honkai Star Rail. For Genshin, if you are listening to this Monday, October 7th, then you have maybe a couple hours in order to complete Mementos of Tavat, which is a anniversary event that is ending today leading into Tuesday, I believe. So you have a very short window to actually play this. This is not evergreen as far as future goes. Get on that if you can. It's a photo event. You go around, you take pictures of where you've been, go down memory lane. It's a fun little anniversary event. Nothing too crazy. But those are the events for Hoyoverse. Dave, why don't we move forward?
All right. So now moving to our new characters, right? We've been talking about and referencing her, Lingsha, new character in Honkai Star Rail on the banner. She is in the Path of Abundance. She's the fire element. And I know last week we referenced her. I think Steve got the path wrong, and then I didn't correct that. I just assumed you were correct, but we got that wrong. It is Path of Abundance, so I do want to clear up any confusion from last week's episode when we mentioned her. But yeah, as far as Lingsha and what she brings to the table, she's going to be a healer. So that is going to be a good part of her kit as far as like her best relic sets. It kind of goes with that. Her best relic sets are going to be the Passerby of the Wandering Cloud, which is the 2-piece, increases outgoing healing by 10%, and then at the beginning of the battle, you immediately recover 1 skill point. So these are kind of going to be the best set for her. You do have, if you haven't farmed for that set yet, her next best option is going to be the typical support set, which is going to be that Messenger of the Traversing Hackerspace, which is going to increase speed, and then when they use their ultimate, increase the speed of the allies, right? So another good support option for her as well. When we go down to the stats as far as what we're building on these pieces, on the artifact sets, for body, you're going to be looking at outgoing healing percentage, right? Because she is a healer, so one of the characters that actually is going to need that. For the feet or the boots, we're going to be looking at speed as the main stat, planar sphere attack, and then for the link rope, you're looking at either energy regen rate or break effect. And then ultimately for priority of substats, you're going to want speed until you hit that desired break point, then actually break percentage, and then attack percentage from there. So you're going to, I think the break point for her on speed is the kind of minimum 151, I think is kind of what you're looking for on that, and then getting her over break effect 100% is kind of what we're looking at there. For the best light cones, obviously her signature light cone is going to be the best option for her. If you do not have her signature light cone or you're unable to pull for it, the next best option is going to actually be another signature light cone. It's going to be Ho-Oh's signature light cone. So if you do have that, that's going to be her second best option. Gives her a lot of energy recharge. Kind of gives her some of that flexibility there. The third best option will be the best option for free-to-play players that do not have signature light cones. That's going to be the 4-star Quid Pro Quo. It's going to be the third best option for her. And then beyond that, we have, just very quickly, multiplication, which is a 3-star light cone, and then you actually have Locha's would be the 5th best, but I think 5 light cones is enough. I don't need to continue to go down that list. And then as far as team synergies, so with her being a newer character, right, we don't have any MOC data, but there are a couple teams that Theory Crafters are kind of floating around out there. So we have kind of the premium Super Break team is going to be Harmony Traveler. It's going to be Firefly. It's going to be Rune May, and it's going to be Lingsha. So that's kind of the Super Break team. If you pulled on all those banners right, because the only free character there is going to be the Harmony Traveler. The second best team, or I shouldn't say the second best team, the second team that's being floated out there is going to be a follow-up attack team based with Fu Xiao, who was the last banner. So if you did have enough to pull for Fu Xiao and you were planning ahead to do these back-to-back banners, it's going to be Fu Xiao with either Topaz and Numbi, or March 7th with her Hunt variant. You then have Robin as the third character, and then Lingsha as the fourth character, the sustain in the team. And then finally, the third team that's being thrown out there is going to look similar to that previous team, as it is also a follow-up attack team. It's just going to be based around Dr. Ratio. So you're going to have Dr. Ratio, whom you hopefully got for free, or if not, maybe you pulled for him on the banner. But then it would be Topaz, or I call him Mose because that's when I see that. I think The Office and Mose, but I think it's actually pronounced Mose or Mozzie. It's not pronounced Mose, but I'm going to keep calling him Mose. Yeah. But anyway, it's either Topaz or Mose. Then for a third character, you're either going to again have Robin or Ting Yun, and then of course Lingsha as that fourth character. Now, Steve, you pulled for Lingsha. You did kind of roadmap this out and budgeted your primo gem, or not primo gem, your stellar jade, excuse me, and pulled for Lingsha. So why don't you tell us kind of about was it any interesting polls stories? Did she come home early? And then what's your initial play experience been like with her?
So, unfortunately, she didn't come home early, but I did win the 50-50. So, I still have a bit of a war chest for what might be coming down the pipe here in the future, depending on reruns and so forth. But that is for the future. That's not necessarily the purpose of talking about Lingsha right now. I would say that I'm going to argue a little bit with the numbers, where one thing to keep in mind with Lingsha is that she scales her healing off of attack, not off of HP. So she specs very similar to Lucha, in that aspect. So you can get away with a semi-DPS style build. I actually gave her Firefly's set, the Iron Cavalry, as well as the planar sphere and ornament that go with that. So the fire-based break, and I've not suffered anything as far as healing goes, but she does deal very good damage, or decent damage in AoE. It's also worth remembering that break effect scales directly to attack and healing on her, which then attack scales back into healing, so you get to double dip on that. So break effect really is a key stat for her. So once you do hit whatever speed break point it is that you're looking for, break effect becomes the next most valuable on her. It is also worth mentioning that her skill is AoE, so for pure fiction, she works wonderfully. She serves as almost a sub DPS to a certain degree, especially on break teams. But you might run into SP issues if you are running Lingsha with Firefly, just because they both can be a little bit SP heavy. So unless you have E Firefly, you might need to be very careful with how you budget skill use and ability use on that team. On something like Fei Zhao, which is the other character that I do run her on, less of an issue. I don't find that I'm as SP hungry on that team quite as much, so you can get away with it, especially since I run it with Topaz and Robin, and Robin isn't necessarily positive SP wise, but Topaz very easily can be. So that's a fairly SP neutral team that works there. Overall, I think she's a great healer. I'm also going to try running her with Jingliu, because I haven't had really a healer that can support her that well, which is what's holding her back for me. So I'm curious to see how that goes, especially because she does have, as one of her talents, the ability to where when a teammate drops below, I want to say it's 30% health, might be somewhere in that range. She automatically does her ult ability and heals everybody up, which works great in a Qingliu team where you're constantly draining health. So she's a very flexible unit, really great. I've been enjoying her quite a bit. So with that sort of brief summary of my experience with her, I guess I'll pass it back to you, Dave, for outside gotcha news.
And real quickly before I do that, I did neglect to kind of talk about our planetary set real quick. And to Steve, your point, yeah, for a super break focus build, yeah, the Iron Cavalry against the Scourge, you mentioned not Robin, Firefly set. Yeah, that would be the option if you're looking to make the most out of kind of that super break damage type team. The planetary sets, while I mentioned what stats you want on them for the main stats, as far as the specific planetary sets, if you are going for more of the full-on healing, then of course you're going to be going with your typical support planetary sets. So it's going to be like Fleet of the Ageless, or if you need a little bit more energy regen, Lushaka, the Sunken Seas, is also going to be another option there. If you are focusing on the super break builds, then yeah, you're going to be looking at the Forge of the Calpagni Lantern, which that's the one where it increases the wearer's speed by 6%, and when the arrow hits enemies targets with fire weaknesses, the wearer's break effect increases by 40%, lasting 1 turn, right? So that's going to kind of be the options there. So I did want to kind of clear that up because I skipped over that a little bit. But jumping into news in other gacha games outside of the Hoyoverse realm. So really quickly, I did want to talk about Brown Dust 2 this past week. We mentioned it last week that it was on the horizon, and now it's here upon us. They have collabed with Senran Kagura, which was an old game that came out on the Nintendo Wii, I believe, back in the early 2000s. But it follows a bunch of, I think, girl ninja shinobis and the various schools ninja schools that they're in or whatever have you. I don't know the exact premise of it all, but it's an aesthetic and I think a collab that fits what Brown Dust 2 is. But that collab is live now. There are currently 2 characters are having their banners run now, and they're going to be running for the next 3 weeks by the time when this is going out, right, on Monday, October 7th. It'll be about 3 weeks, but in total, they're running for basically a full month. But the character banners running now, and these are limited banners, meaning that they will not be in the standard pool once the collab is over. But the 2 characters banners running currently are for Yozakura and also Hikaja, and I hope I'm pronouncing those right, because again, I'm not super familiar with the source material. Now, those are the banners that are running. You do also have Yo, who is another character. They are giving her skin out, they're giving that character out for free, and they're letting you max it for free, just essentially by participating in the event, kind of doing your dailies that you normally would in the rotation. And that will allow you to, for those that maybe don't play Brown Dust 2, basically the equivalent of Constellation 6 it, just for playing and doing your dailies. So it's free. There's no pulls required to do that for Yomi. And then the 4th character they're going to do in this collaboration is Yumi, and she is going to be on a banner. Just that banner isn't going to start until next week. So when this goes live, it will be the coming week, right? So we got to adjust in my head the dates and stuff. But yeah, so she'll be out here in the near future, and that will be the 4 characters that are available. If you're looking into like which character is worth pulling the most for from the collab, early thoughts and theory crafting on this is Hikaja is going to be the most meta, because if you can get her to +3 or +4, I think not only does the skill point cost get reduced, but also basically the ability loses its cooldown, so you can cast it every turn, which is pretty wild. Let me see if I can confirm that real quick. Yeah, it goes down to 1 turn at +4, as opposed to normally being +3. So absolutely wild to be able to cast it every turn. But that's the that's the collaboration that's going on right now. For pre-registration stuff, as I kind of fumbled there, Girls Frontline 2 Exilium, the pre-registration is out for global servers, so we're able to pre-register for that. I posted that link in our Discord. And then also this past week, probably about 4 days ago from recording, so about a week ago from when it goes live, they released the prologue trailer for Girls Frontline to Exilium. And for those of you unfamiliar with the Girls Frontline genre or this particular game, there's the original Girls Frontline was kind of a strategy type point to point game that's been out for, man, I want to say 7+ years. But Girls Frontline 2, while having been out in other markets overseas, coming global, for those that are unfamiliar with it, it is going to be an XCOM style game. So for those that do like the XCOM style and that type of challenge or that type of strategy RPG, it's that, but with waifus. So looking forward to that one. It's kind of up there on my list because I do love XCOM style games. And so I'm interested to see how that translates to a gacha game. In other gacha news, we'll talk about more waifus games. So Nikke, Goddess of Victory, they have a new event that just went out. It very much gives me Persona 5 vibes with the Phantom Thieves. Is quite literally the character that's going to come out next week is called Phantom and looks very much like she's a Phantom Thief from Persona 5. But the character that came out this week is an alternative skin for the character Quincy, Escape Queen. So Quincy was already in the game, and now this is a second separate character that is second. So different weapon type, different abilities and such. So for the new Quincy, she is a Burst 3 character, as opposed to, I believe, the original one is a Burst 2 character. But she's an attacker class using an SMG and is the water element from the Missileless faction. So she's available on Banner now, and then Phantom we'll talk about next week when she's released. But the other thing going on with Nikke, along with this event and this Phantom Thieves themed event, is a login bonus. So if you log in for 21 days over the course of the event, you're going to get a free skin for Tova, which is the baseball fan skin. It's basically her dressed up in a baseball outfit, so uniform. So she's got the hat, the jersey, the pants, and then a baseball bat. It's adorable. But anyway, that's going to be free. I mentioned it last week, but I didn't know how they were giving it out. They are giving it out for free. You just need to log in for 21 days. In other gacha news, what was interesting, we stumbled on this headline, is Psy Games is going to be partnering with the Breeders' Cup. So for those that are unfamiliar, in the United States, horse racing, there are 3 major horse racing events that still, I think, get national attention in the sporting world, and that would be the Kentucky Derby, the Breeders' Cup, and I just had the third one, and I forgot it.
I really wish you hadn't, because I was counting on you to remember that one, because I could never remember the third.
It's the Preakness. That's what it was. I knew it was a P. I had this. I literally had this. But yeah, so you had the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stake, or the Breeders' Cup stuff. And so these are some of the biggest horse racing events in the United States. And I believe this is going to be aired on NBC, which is one of the major broadcasting channels in the United States. And Psy Game, most notably known because of various gacha games out there, is partnering with it, which to me means we're going to see potentially some gacha games advertised during the build up to this race and during the event itself. I'm reminded a little bit of over the summer, we had the Olympics and there were some Honkai Star Rail advertisements as well. So it's interesting to see mobile gaming companies and these gacha gaming companies start to take up advertising space in more mainstream things as the industry grows. And the Breeders' Cup, I think it's a $2 million title race, but it's happening November 2nd of this year.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm really, really hoping that they pull a Pretty Derby, and afterwards they have the horses get on stage in order to do a title show. I would lose it if they did something like that. Even if they just had girls in costumes get up, like pretending that they are the horse or whatever, I would lose my mind.
We're seeing it. I mean, a lot of the stuff. Just a quick aside, we've always seen advertising and collaborations and things like this in China or in Japanese or in Korean markets. So to see some things come global into the stateside is pretty interesting, because we've recently had the McDonald's collaboration with Genshin Impact. Right now we see this. We saw Star Rail during the Olympics.
Well,
so it's interesting to see it, and also advertising space like in Times Square in New York as well. So just interesting to see that pick up.
Advertising space, that makes sense because you just pay money. But the
Sure.
stuff that really gets me, and I brought this up before we recorded, was back earlier this season when it was the Dodgers, I believe, had a VTuber do the seventh inning stretch.
Yeah, the Los Angeles Dodgers is
Yeah.
a Major League Baseball
Baseball
team
team.
for those unfamiliar.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So you had a VTuber do handle the seventh inning stretch for a Major League Baseball game, which means that there were some old Dodgers fans sitting in that stadium who have no idea what's going on, having to watch a little CGI shark girl sing the national anthem. Like that's
Yeah, was it the anthem or did she do "Take Me Out to the Ball
oh no,
Game"?
it was "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." It wasn't the national anthem. It was "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." But yeah, that is a culture shift I'm not prepared for, if I'm being honest.
Well, no, it is worth noting too. I think for that, I wonder if if they were something they were going to do that anyway because of the uptick, I think, in popularity of stuff like this. But also, there's the connection with Shohei Ohtani he's on the Los Angeles Dodgers this year. The first year they signed a huge contract with them, right? And so he's on the Los Angeles Dodgers, and obviously a huge overseas market with his connection to a lot of those, the eastern markets, the eastern areas, right? Whether it be Korea, Japan, China, whatever it may be, that's kind of we're seeing players from overseas. Originally, it was like, to get lost in some baseball lore here, right? Ichiro Suzuki, originally when he was playing with the Mariners, and the Mariners had a very strong following from Eastern markets because of Ichiro Suzuki. You go to Yao Ming with the Houston Rockets in basketball. China had a huge following of the Houston Rocket, or the Rockets had a huge following of Chinese fan base because of Yao Ming. So I wonder if that maybe had some influence here, or if that was just something they're doing because of the uptick in popularity of anime type culture.
I think it's, and I know we're getting a little bit in the weeds and we're near the end of the episode, but I do want to quickly dig into this. I do think it's a more of a culture thing because Japan and Major League Baseball have been fairly, I don't want to say closely knit, but there's been ties there for 20 plus years. Maybe not major character or major players, not characters. Been over here in the United States, but I remember growing up there were a number of Japanese players who played in Major League Baseball. So I don't necessarily think it's that side of the market. I think it's just, at least personally, they're accepting that it's a culture shift. And also, if I'm being blunt, I think that baseball has been running into a generational issue where younger people aren't necessarily following the sport as much, so they're looking to try and drive interest. But I don't know. Like I said, I was not prepared for
it's
for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's been the pipeline for a while. Like I said, I mentioned Ichiro being kind of one of the first mainstream, very popular because he was successful in the Major League Baseball. Great hitter, contact hitter and such. But yeah, so just an interesting little tidbit there. In other news, I did want to touch on real quick, kind of some shutdown and announcements, the end of services that were made. So Owl's Fiction, I think, did actually shut down. It officially shut down. And then Romancing Saga Reuniverse announced their end of service is going to be December 2nd. So that one, I remember playing that one when it came out. And then after, I think, a couple of years, I had quit it. And then I came back to it just because I wanted to see what it was doing. Because it was always a pretty generous gotcha. And they did, leveling was interesting in that one because you had to grind out stat points by playing with the individuals to get them their HP, get them their strength, their agility, etc. So, but it wasn't an energy based gotcha. So you could literally play essentially as much as you wanted. So when that came out, that was kind of a big thing. Everybody was leaning into stamina based gotchas. So it was pretty generous as well on the polls, if I remember correctly. And it had that retro Super Nintendo 8-bit, 16-bit whatever type feel in that gotcha. And as somebody who grew up with, those consoles and that couch co-op gaming type stuff, it kind of hit the nostalgia button for me, even though I wasn't familiar with the IP specifically. But I did enjoy that one for a time. But that's going to kind of wrap it up for us this week. I know we hit on a lot of things, so appreciate you guys for joining us this week. Let us know your thoughts on support characters and their roles in the game. Maybe you guys have some differing thoughts from Steve or myself, or maybe you guys can dunk on me for some of my takes on it, or maybe you got something for Steve to think about as well. But if you did enjoy this episode and you'd like to show your support, be sure to like, follow, subscribe to the channel. You can always email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions or suggestions for the show. We also have the link to our Discord in the description down below, so you can join us over there for news, game nights, content notifications. I know Steve's been doing a good job posting up codes when they come out for Genshin and Star Rail, so we can get some free currencies and a couple other free goodies there as well. Be sure to join us next week when we discuss common gacha mistakes for newcomers to the genre. Till then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.